Thank you for coming. My name is John Nine. I'm one of the senior programmers here at the festival, and welcome to this Power of Story Art of Episodic Writing event. This is an exciting. It's kind of the opening for our Art of Film weekend as well. We've had an exciting week of the festival. We talk about the work in the festival in lots of different ways, and this Art of Film Weekend is as we sort of transition to a time when we talk about the work in terms of art and craft, and in terms of the creative process. It's something that we think is not only interesting to the audience, but also reflects the focus of the Institute from the very, very beginning, the idea of how artists approach the work that they do. This is a conversation that also reflects, I think, a very changing landscape for that work, and the opportunities that an independent sensibility has to express itself in different forms, in longer forms, in episodic forms, and for artists to really be the progenitor of that work. And so it's something that we're all responding to at the Institute, both through the festival, and you see a section in the festival that has grown over the years since a few years ago when we premiered Top of the Lake. And we've had work ever since then, up until this year, when the section actually for the first time was open to open submissions, which was exciting to us. And I think you see the result of that in the diversity of the work, where it came from and where it's going. That's exciting to us. It's also reflected in the Institute's feature film program in the labs. We now have an episodic storytelling lab, and that's been something that has also been part of the process. So, I think we all recognize that it's out there. We're seeing incredible new work. We sense that the landscape is different. There's a lot to talk about in terms of diversity and originality of the work that's there. So this is an exciting conversation for us. You all have the bios, the extensive bios of the people who are on stage. So I'm just going to say a few brief words. First, thanking everybody for coming. Do we have lights we can bring? There we go. Them. This is who I'm talking about, the them. Gina Prince-Bythewood, who was here for Love and Basketball many years ago, and this year has a piece in the special events section called Shots Fired. Jill Soloway, who's had a bunch of work here over the years. Afternoon Delight, a feature film in our competition a few years ago. Transparent, of course, we know her for, and I Love Dick, which is in the special events this year. Larry Karaszewski, whose film and television credits are extensive and wonderful. Ed Wood, Big Eyes, and of course the series that we've talked about a lot this year, People vs. O.J. Simpson. Marti Noxon, another veteran, Buffy the Vampire Slayer, Unreal, and a wonderful, wonderful film in our U.S. dramatic competition this year, To the Bone. Yeah. Issa Rae, storyteller, novelist, YouTube sensation, Misadventures of an Awkward Black Girl, and Insecure. Thank you for coming. And of course, my good colleague, Michelle Satter, founding director of the feature film program, who every time she talks about the work and the expanding episodic form gets really giddy and excited, and that's why she's the perfect person to lead this conversation. Thank you all for coming.
Thank you, John. Please welcome my dream panel. A lot of girl power up here. Yeah. My panelists, they're the creators, the showrunners who are reinventing and sustaining the best of television writing. And the panel grows out of our response, and as John talked about, our episodic storytelling lab, and now, a formal submission process for the festival, is that our writers, directors, producers are really excited about what's going on in TV, the opportunities there, the bold vision, the unforgettable characters in this changing landscape, and wanted to know more, which is the reason why we're here this afternoon. And in this conversation, we hope to give you some insight, and we're going to focus more on the art and craft of multi-episodic storytelling rather than the business, but I'm going to slip in a couple of business questions as well. Here's what we know. In the past 5 years, we've seen an explosion of cable, online, and digital platforms, and an openness to new forms of episodic storytelling, where you're no longer bound by the traditional formats. Creators are experimenting with episodic length, distribution models, new media tools, and different ways of connecting with audiences. And additionally, many of the writers on this panel started in features and have added episodic to their body of work. And they're demonstrating there's a real fluidity right now going on between forms. And we're going to get into sort of looking at, sort of opportunities and challenges between different forms. But what I wanted to do, I'm always interested in the personal in introductions. So I'm going to ask all of the panelists to talk about, you've heard of their credits, you can read their credits, but what we wanted to start it off with is if they can talk about their background as a writer, what's inspired your work, what do you love about creating and writing for TV? So Issa, you're on first.
Oh, great.
Yeah.
I am just honored to be here, and I've just wanted to be in television since basically the 90s. I remember I was born in LA but lived in Maryland for a while, and then when I came back in the 6th grade, the first TV taping I went to was Moesha, and they shout out to Moesha, hey man. They gave us the, I think I won it, I'm gonna tell myself I won it, but a script of the actual episode, and I remember using that as a template to write my own television scripts, and I felt like, oh my gosh, this is the formula right here. And just because there was such a wide array of people of color on the television, I felt like I could do it as well. And then I got to college, and there was just, Black people had disappeared from television for the most part, and except for reality shows. And I remember just being frustrated with the depiction of Black women specifically on the screen, and Flavor of Love is what kind of sent me over the edge, because I was like, wow, this is worldwide. Like, people are enjoying this, they're watching it, they're loving it, but there's not a balance. Like, that has the right to exist, but where are the people that I know and see on screen, and where are the people who I saw in like Living Single and Martin and all of the other shows that I felt like I could relate to then. And so just created via the web, via a series called The Awkward Black Girl, and then that helped me to transition into television via Insecure.
That's great. We're going to talk about that in a moment. Marti, yeah.
I'm one of those kids, we joke about the fact that all you need to create a writer is, a really dysfunctional family. I don't think that's always true, but in my case it worked. I had a very privileged upbringing, but I'm a bipolar mom and a absent dad, and I think that movies and television were really the way I kept my world organized in my head. Like I if I could escape into that, and also I thought like, oh, these are organizing principles. If I do this, then that will happen. Didn't work. But yeah, they really became my haven, and so. Even though I grew up in Los Angeles, my dad was a documentary filmmaker, and what you'll see even here is those two worlds don't really mix. We were at a thing last night, and all the documentary people were over here, and they sort of tried to make us talk to each other. So I used to sneak on the lots, I used to jump fences and try to, jump and, sneak into sets and see what was going on. And so I'm really blessed that I had, I had the persistence, I guess, because I just stuck with it past all reason. And then I got Buffy, and Joss was just a tremendous teacher about using, truthful stories in creative ways. We always talk about the Trojan horse, like bringing your story in the container of something else, so that people who might not otherwise, get that kind of information. And so, yeah, I became an acolyte of that idea. And God, I like you, I'm really honored to be here.
Yes.
Great.
I'm very honored to be here. I have a writing partner, Scott Alexander, and we sort of are drawn to eccentric true life stories. And it's just something that's happened in our career. We started our career really first as comedy writers, and I remember we had a bit of success, but we went in and pitched an idea, and the executive said, that's a great idea for a movie, but you guys are comedy writers. You guys, you know, that's not something you guys can write. And so we're sort of being told that we weren't good enough to write our own ideas, and we kind of said fuck that, and we went off and we wrote Ed Wood to kind of prove to the world we could do something like that, and sort of invented this a new genre. He gave a kick in the ass to the sort of the true life story film, which had kind of biopics that had gotten really kind of like, they're all over 3 hours long and really about great men and things like this. And so we sort of thought about telling a sort of an alternate history of the United States, sort of a fringe history. And we've had a great deal of success with it. And I think what really drew us to move over into television is that that's where the good storytelling is happening right now. That if you open your paper on Friday and all those movies are opening from studios, those are a different type of film, you know, and so I think what you're seeing is, the reason you're seeing a fluidity now between feature people and TV people is because if you want to tell interesting stories that have a certain, you know, depth to them, television is much more open to it. In fact, extremely open to it. We're going through a period right now where it's sort of like what movies were in the 1970s. I feel that's what TV is right now.
Great. Jill.
I like to say I grew up worshiping at the altar of television. My sister and I spent nearly all of our time just like on the carpet in front of the TV on our knees, like watching Brady Bunch, Love Boat, Fantasy Island, getting yellow legal pads out and doing our own Miss America scoring systems, you know, Saturday morning cartoons, and then a little bit older with my mom watching Mary Tyler Moore, may she rest in peace.
Yes.
And Rhoda and Phyllis and Bob Newhart, this like quadrant of people who were kind of our community. They were, I think of them as my mom's community in some ways, that I think of them as like these early feminists who didn't have kids and didn't have families. And my sister and I watched my mom watching these shows. And I think I didn't know that you could be a TV writer, but I just knew that we were all staring at the glass all the time, and I wanted to get on the other side of the glass. And my mom was really involved in civil rights, and so I was also kind of always dreaming of being part of a movement. So as 6 Feet Under came about and Transparent, it turned out that I was able to take my kind of movement desires, especially about feminism and creating rootable female protagonists and queer protagonists, and really put them into shows where I could kind of just, you know, person by person go, you know, I am changing. For example, I'm responsible for about 100% of the sexy rabbis on television. About 100% of the sexy female rabbis. On 6 Feet Under, like, I was like, I'm gonna create some sexy female rabbis, I will. And so just noticing that you can take things that you want to change in the world and put them in television, and then things do change. It's been amazing.
Also, was everyone else honored to be here? I think we lost our TV. It broke, and when I was about 9, and my parents decided not to replace it, which was horrifying to me and my family. But what it did is it forced me to read, and I just became this voracious reader and really read a book a day. And I think that's definitely where my love of storytelling comes from. Once finally we got a TV back when I got into high school, I think it was my junior year of high school, discovered soap operas and became obsessed. And seriously, I watched 5 a day. And I read this article, really obsessed. I used to read Soap Opera Digest as well. And, there was an article about soap opera writers, and it said how much they made, and I was shocked. And I was like, wow, that's a job. I could do that. So that became my focus, but it also got me to start writing scripts. And similarly, I had issues in my family as well with mental illness and addiction, and to be able to feel all the angst and anger and sadness that I was going through, put it in a script and have a happy ending was kind of phenomenal to me. And I feel like with my writing that every script I've done is helping me deal with something. I think writing is incredible therapy, can be incredibly cathartic, and I just use that. So I feel like I'm blessed that I get to do what I love to do and put things out in the world that are in my head.
Right, thank you. This is a question that's going to go to both Larry and Gina, who both have multiple feature credits and have more recently created TV, and wanted to, for you to talk about, there's a lot of people in the audience who come from from feature writing and are looking at TV and thinking like, well, how do I make that choice in terms of, does this story, does this idea or premise live in a multi-episode series format, or is this a feature idea? Looking at what are the, sort of the opportunities that you have in working now in TV for your series, and also what are the biggest challenges for you, and how you're thinking about it right now, having just, finished a first season. But I know Gina's show, Shots Fired, is about to premiere March 22nd. Be there. Yeah. But talk about that. Talk about how you, with ideas, with story ideas, how you make that decision about where they should live. Yeah.
Well, I started in TV. My first job was A Different World, and it was a phenomenal. It was a phenomenal experience. It was my favorite show, to be able to have my first show be my favorite show. And what I love so much about TV, even though coming out of film school, I knew I wanted to direct and do features, but getting to start in TV, what I love was the immediacy. Like, you write it and then it's on the air, whereas film, you write it and sadly in my case it takes like 2 years to get it made. But I always loved that, but at the whole time I was aspiring to get into features. But when this opportunity came, I actually wasn't planning on going back to television, but I had this opportunity to tell the story in this world, and dealing with something that was so important to me and my husband, and deal with police shootings, which, for us just really feels like the civil rights issue of our day. And it felt like network television could be an amazing platform because of the reach, and also to be able to tell it in long form instead of trying to do it in a 2-hour thing, that we could tell a 10-hour story. And that's an amazing thing, to be able to give these arcs to your characters and give a whole breadth of a story over 10 hours. And even going in, though, we call Shots Fired a 10-hour film, and really treated it that way. So we were trying to bring a film aesthetic to television, which was helpful to me as well, because it was different for me. I'll say what's very difficult, again, grateful, absolutely. TV in network is hard, because you're doing everything at the same time. You're writing, you're producing, in my case, directing and editing. And, in film, you write it and you're done. And then you direct it and you're done. Then you edit. So struggling, how do you do your best work when you're doing everything at the same time? So we had to finally push back a little bit and say that this is not working for us. We're sacrificing the show. And there was pushback, of course, because there's a formula of how network TV is done, but props to Fox. They acquiesced, and we got to slow down the process, slow down the writing process, and then just put editing aside until we were finished shooting. So yeah, if I did it again, I would love to do more the cable model of write all the episodes first, so that you're done with that. You see the whole arc of the season, and you can focus on everything else.
Right.
Yeah, for Scott and I, it was more, we sort of always were interested in doing television, but I think we're very plot oriented, and we have a very 1970s view of what television was. It's like the living room or a cop. We just didn't know what they would do every week. They always seem to be doing the same things. And so when the idea to do OJ came up, it was more what you sort of about the big canvas. I mean, OJ was one of those things for us. There's no way we would have done it as a movie, because in 2 hours it would be just telling you all the things you already know, and you would have had the Bronco chase on page 10, and it would have been like, a scene. And for us, that was actually the least interesting thing about this series. What made us, Scott and I deliberate all the time about what projects to do, and we vacillate back and forth. But when OJ came up, it was the only time we've ever just said instantly in a room, yes, we want to do that, yes, because we knew instantly that in a 10-hour form, you could investigate all the themes and characters and all the interesting stuff on the side of the case, which is really, for us, what made it so fascinating. I think it's what made it fascinating for everybody else, because it became so much more than just a murder trial. It became about class. It became about sexism. It became about the sort of celebrity infotainment culture, and we were just and the more research we did, the more it just felt very relevant to what was happening now. And the more things change, the more they stay the same. And so we just felt like the only way to tell that story would be in a 10-hour version. And obviously with Ezra's documentary, now there's a 20-hour version. So it's like if you would have told people 2 years ago you're going to have to watch 20 hours about the O.J. Simpson trial, they would have said you're crazy. That's actually been one of the greatest things about this past year has been when I would tell people I'm working on a movie about O.J. Simpson, or a TV show about O.J. Simpson, there was an initial that sounds kind of trashy, and to have it sort of not be trashy and kind of hit everything that we wanted to hit.
What was the origin? Did you guys get approached by Fox? Or
Brad Simpson, who was one of the producers, went into a used bookstore and saw Tubin's book and said, And I think he brought it into FX, and we jumped on right away.
Got it.
And then Ryan came on that way after that.
Got it.
Great. Okay, so we're going to show some clips, and I asked all the panelists to select a clip to show that illustrates a moment when we first really engaged with the central character, which is really the life. I mean, it's the lifeblood of writing and features, but it's really the lifeblood of series. It's a moment that makes us care. This is, these were the instructions. A moment that makes us care and invest in a character and what happens next. So what I wanted to do is we're going to start.
I want to share that I didn't read the instructions. So I'll be talking about something else.
Okay. Well, you can make it into that.
Okay.
You'll get there.
I'll reinvest in characters you know well.
Okay.
There you go.
There you go.
All right.
Sorry.
That's important too. Okay. So we're going to start with Larry, with OJ.
Okay.
And what I'm going to ask him is, just set it up for us. Why did you choose the scene, and what should we be looking at?
Yeah. Well, funny. It's a scene from episode 4, so I guess I'm really late about setting up a character. but
Nobody read my instructions.
No, I did read your instruction, and I think that you'll see the scene is that the first 3 episodes of OJ are very plot oriented, where the first episode is really the first week of the murder, the second episode is the Bronco chase, the third episode was really about putting the dream team together, and the show doesn't really change, but it sort of takes a little from the 4th episode on, a little bit more character, a little bit more just it slows down the pace a bit. And it was very it's funny you're saying about your show is, you think of your show as a 10-hour movie. We were constantly debating, is it a 10-hour movie or is it 10 one-hour movies? And so we felt like every episode had to have its own thing, its own really spotlight a certain character or a certain theme, or be about something than just the events. And episode 4 was really about the rise of Johnny Cochran. About how Cochran sort of came into this case. He was hired at the end of episode 3, I think, and then this is really about how he transforms the case, and also about how things switch. That by the week of the murder and the Bronco chase, it's obvious to everyone that OJ is going to be convicted. I mean, even OJ feels he's going to be convicted. And what Cochran and Shapiro do, come up with a plan to sort of give OJ a little bit more, to believe in himself again. And we called it, from Marsha's point of view, the unraveling of certainties. She was certain about all these facts, and these guys were able to tear away all the facts. And so this is a scene where Johnny visits a very dejected OJ in his cell and gives a very big speech. It's very unlike our writing to have such big speeches, but it actually started out really short, and we kept on adding and kept on adding and kept on adding, and it came to this.
Great. Okay. Wow. He is the greatest coach.
Exactly. No, that's
Yeah.
exactly what we looked at it as.
Yeah.
That's why it kept on getting bigger and bigger, because it became, about Johnny building up. Whether though all those things were true about Johnny in terms of where he was in his life and that time when the game actually happened and all that stuff. I don't even know if Johnny ever saw that game. It was one of those things where we were using it as that Johnny's ability to install faith back in OJ. That's what the scene had to do.
Yeah, and there's also so much exposition in it
Hmm.
about OJ.
Yes.
He's reminding him, and that's
Correct.
beautifully done.
Right.
It's so, the performances are so compelling and it's so beautifully written that you don't even feel like you're getting the facts.
Right.
It's just
Well, that was what it
Yeah.
came from a real incident where
Yeah.
Johnny visited OJ in prison after OJ appeared in court looking like hell, and no one actually knows what they said in there, but basically told OJ who he was,
Yeah.
and that led to OJ coming into court the following day saying 100% not guilty, and there was a brand new OJ Simpson on television
Yeah.
that day.
interesting. Okay, we're going to move to Jill. Tell us about the scene you chose.
Okay, so it's sort of a climactic scene of the pilot of I Love Dick, and it's a dinner table, a meeting between Chris Kraus and her husband Silver and the titular Dick, which we called Kevin Bacon all week. We said, "You're the titular Dick," and played by Kevin Bacon. And the scene, well, I chose it because it's really kind of everybody throwing down on the table for the first time in the pilot. And I think I also really wanted to share it because I think in some ways the under mythology of Chris's story is that she is trying to give birth to her voice as an artist, and we think about this show as kind of the invention of the female gaze, which I don't know what that means, but I was trying to figure it out as I was shooting it. And so what happens, I think, for women is they get divided into the good girl and the bad girl, and we're always these objects to men, and Chris is trying to become the subject, and in doing so, she's splitting these two men into the two poles of a triangle. They're trying to split her, and she's trying to split them. So when you watch the scene, you'll see like I changed, as a director, I changed techniques every time there was a beat change, as each person tried to stay as the protagonist and stay as the subject. So it's a little artsy, it's a little kind of meta and about itself and about the female gaze, but that's who Chris Kraus is, who wrote the book, and that's really what the whole series is about, is a woman trying to continue to reclaim her position as the subject in her own life.
That's so great.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah. So much of it is, of course, is played off of her face and behavior, so, is telling us a lot about all their characters. And of course, the dialogue is fantastic. Is there anything else that you want the audience to know about the scene and what you were, the
No.
challenges for you at all in writing it?
Well, Sarah Gubbins wrote it,
Uh-huh.
and yeah, as I said, the challenges for me were mostly directing, where I really wanted to give the audience a sense of being in Chris's body as she was losing control of her feeling of being the subject, So there's this moment where Dick is like looking in her eyes, but it's looking in the camera's eyes, which is something we really just found on the day. I was totally unprepared as a director. I was just going to shoot it in a regular way, but then I kept seeing these other things, like the two shot that held them looking, and I kept realizing that I could change the shooting style within the scene as a way of attempting to kind of unearth the way film unearth the male gaze, and just keep trying myself to say, what is the female gaze? What does it mean to return the gaze? What does it mean to look instead of be looked at? So I was really playing on the day and finding stuff, and I think that's why it's still fun for me to watch that scene.
Yeah, great. Okay, Gina, you chose a scene from Shots Fired, so set that up for us and tell us why you chose it.
Okay. I'm hoping, I changed it like 3 or 4 times, so hopefully this is right. I believe, I hope, pray that it is a scene about, we have a character named Pastor Janae in the show, and she's a young pastor, and what we were really doing is exploring, this new movement that's happening and that really came out of Ferguson, that women have been at the forefront of the movement. So we wanted to explore that. This is also a character who is struggling between being an activist and what that means, and how to marry that with her faith. But also in the pilot, we don't know what side she's on. Is she trying to become the voice of this movement because she wants the press, or is it really something sincere to her? So the other thing that we were dealing with is the conflict between the older pastors and this younger group coming up, and the fact that the younger folks really don't want, the Sharptons and Jesse Jackson to come. They're looking for the new blood. So this is from Hour 2. It was written by Mick Betancourt, and that's it.
That is the scene we have.
Okay.
Oh, good.
Good.
Yes.
Gina, I remember you saying that you write to turning points in your work, and turning points in terms of character and story, and you can clearly see this, and I know that's how you introduced it, but is there anything else that you want to say in terms of that, in terms of craft and a way that you approach storytelling?
Wow. I think, Larry said that the great thing about TV is how much time you can spend building a character. And so with a character like Pastor Janae, it really was, over the course of the 10 hours, being able to follow her trajectory, to not be always clear of where she's coming from until moments like this where we realize that she is sincere, which was so exciting about writing the scene. The one thing I didn't mention is the crux of the show is that 2 young boys have been killed by police, one white and one black, and the young black boy's murder's not being dealt with at all, and she's trying to call attention to it, which was a big part of the scene here. But I just love to, especially dealing with a subject matter like this, if it's not coming through character and you're not telling story through our characters, then it feels more like a documentary. And we didn't want to ever feel like we're preaching. That's why it's good to have a pastor character preach for you. But it's great to be able to again, tell story and hit those turning points through character moments.
Great. Okay, Marti, you're on.
Oh boy, I feel a little bit better. I feel like I picked an okay clip.
Okay, good.
I'm feeling better. Just to put this in context, Girlfriend's Guide to Divorce. This is a scene from season 2, but another fun thing about writing for television is sometimes things happen that surprise you. And one of the things that surprised me, because I didn't know I was going to be telling the story of a marriage that won't die, that the relationship and it's funny too, because you'll find when you're able to write in this long form that you discover different kinds of wishes inside yourself. And I realized that my fantasy divorce was one that state of friendship, and that my wish fulfillment was about a friendship that would last and a relationship that would endure, despite the fact that these people probably shouldn't be married. And this is, I think I also wanted to show this clip. It's one of my favorite scenes of season 2, because Jill and I were just talking about this last night. A lot of times you want to write away from what people are really feeling. And, what we talked about, behavior being a really good way of showing how people are feeling. So rarely do people say what they really mean, but the context of this episode is that they've been trying to spend the weekend together alone because they haven't, they've started dating again in secret, and now they're trying to figure out if they really could be together again. So they're staying in their own home where they lived as a family for the weekend by themselves, and they've been talking about everything but the thing. And sometimes I say to writers when I'm working with them, sometimes cliches are true because they're true. Sometimes people do say certain things and they say them, and there's a kind of an ache of familiarity when you hear it because you've said that thing. And I felt like this was a great scene to talk about writing away from stuff, but also writing right at it and not being afraid every once in a while to let somebody say the thing that you yourself have said. And this fight actually came from a dynamic in my own marriage. And again, there's an interesting thing because in the long form part of what happened in writing this season was me exploring my fault, where I was at fault. And I think my ex-husband's probably really afraid of this show, but the truth is if he watched it, he'd see that there's an apology in it too. There's a reckoning with my part. And finally, just Trojan Horse. This is a very fluffy, by design, happy, pretty show with women who wear really nice clothes, but it's a trick. I really wanted to write about sexual politics and relationships.
Great.
They were work emails or they were...
Say, in watching that, there's so much story and character that you exposed in these two scenes or in the sequence.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I forgot there was a black part between there, but you know, I've been really busy, so. I mean, I guess, yeah. I mean, the one of the fun things about doing this long form is that I knew when I wrote the pilot that she was just as much at fault as he was, and you know, it's interesting that felt, you know, kind of. The easy way to write TV is that it's binary. One person did something bad, and so the other person is at fault, and that person is aggrieved, and that's just not life, you know. And what's been fun is doing a show on Bravo that has scenes like that, because it's just not clean. It's not clean, and I think that's why I really like that scene. I also think it's the moment when you really see Abby in a different light. So to me, it was a moment of revelation. You're like, oh, she's awful to live with. And I guess I am too, so yeah.
Okay, Issa, you're on. Yeah.
I chose the opening scene. It actually wasn't the opening scene in the script. We just wanted to really just kind of show you who this character is. and it's kind of through the lens of kids who I feel like are sometimes monsters. You know, they're like little dogs in that they can smell your fear and they can really just call bullshit if you're like uncertain about yourself, and if you're not confident, and you know, for lack of a better word, they'll kind of pick at the seams and call you out for it. So this scene was something that we noticed in editing that we wanted to put up front so that you're just in the story, in the episode, and you understand kind of who she is. So that's the clip.
Great.
You in for short
Like that. It was supposed to start sooner, but you guys get the idea. But yeah, we just wanted to kind of show who this character was by the questions that she was being asked, and you know, children were kind of picking her about her hair and about why she chose this particular profession, and it's supposed to show like sort of the uncertainty of where this character is at this time in her life on her birthday.
Beautifully does that. It's so funny. I remember watching the pilot, and it's like, I got her. I got who she is. And great, and goes from there. I wanted to talk about, because you mentioned the pilot episode first, right at the beginning, and I wanted Jill to talk about I Love Dick and talk about, because a lot of you are thinking about, where do you start? What needs to be achieved in a pilot, and how you think about it. So if you can talk about when you were, and a lot of times that pilot episode is scrapped and it becomes the actual second episode can be the pilot, for it, but different ways of doing it. But talk about that.
Yeah, well, I actually think of the pilot sort of like a puzzle. I think the pilot needs to have an engine in it that you can return to over and over and over again, episode to episode to episode. And that engine really needs to be present, I think, in every scene and sometimes in every line of dialogue. In the Transparent pilot, for example, it was Maura asking the question, will you still love me if? And this question of people having secrets as boundaries, and so when I meet with writers who are coming in, and we're going to go into Amazon and pitch a story, a lot of people will come in with like a huge Bible, and they'll be like, "This is Kate, 28," and they'll name the characters. And Kate grew up, and I'm like, I don't want to read the Bible. I don't want to learn about your characters. I don't want to see your season. I just want you to pitch me the pilot, moment to moment to moment, protagonist. Beat change, beat change, beat change, need, so that when you get to the end of the pilot pitch, everybody in the room goes, holy fuck, I need to see what happens next. And I know exactly what this show is about. So that's kind of, I think, I haven't seen a pilot story become, for at least in my experience, become the second episode, because I feel like it really very, like almost neatly, methodically needs to have this beautiful prism at the center of it that works, almost like a turbine to keep everything going for 5 years. You have to be able to see that this is going to happen for 5 years for a pilot to really make sense.
I think what you're referring to is more old school. Is that a lot of times those pilot episodes were sort of almost like the first act of a movie, where like she moves to town or they get the job, and it winds up like the next episode is them at the job. So it wound up being, hey, why do we need that first episode? Let's just we don't need to meet everybody. We'll just go right to episode 2.
Right. All right, Issa, I wanted you to talk about Insecure, and I wanted you to talk about your journey from Awkward Black Girl, which was a web series, to Insecure, how that happened for you, and also as both the star and creator of the show, A lot of roles for you and writers. So how do you manage all those roles? This is probably a 5-part question for you. And how much of yourself do you put on, on screen? So why don't you just jump in, start with the journey, and then really talk about how you're managing those roles. And
Yeah, you're gonna have to remind me of all of those questions.
okay, I thought so.
Well, I created a web series in 2011. It was actually my 3rd web series, and that was Awkward Black Girl. It was just about an uncomfortable black girl who navigating life and who didn't fit the definitions of mainstream blackness as portrayed by the media. And it was someone that I identified with heavily, and oddly enough, I wanted a college friend to play the role, but I came up with the idea in 2009 when I was on the East Coast, and she was on the East Coast, and wanted her to voice this animated character and then ultimately just play her. But animation costed money, and I was like, I'm broke, so I can't do this, and ended up not pursuing the project until 2011. And when I asked her to play the part, she was like, girl, I'm in law school. Like, I can't. And that ended up being the best thing that ever happened to me, just because, it forced me to kind of go into it and make it happen at all costs. And the costs were $25, not $25,000. It was $25 to take my best friend and one of the actors to coffee. My best friend helped me film the first episode. And when I uploaded it, it started gaining traction. On our 7th episode, we raised money for it just because I was still working a full-time job. And when I got an agent and manager, I thought, oh, it's on, like the money's about to come in. And quit my job. And of course, because I had no savings account, was broke shortly after. And so we did a Kickstarter campaign, started one to raise funds for the series, and that got attention of the press and certain media outlets. And through that, Pharrell Williams had an I Am Other company, a platform via Google and YouTube in which they launched 100 channels for $100 million. And he happened to have one of those channels, so they funded our 2nd season. And through the 2nd season premiere, Rolling Stone and New York Times reviewed our first episode. And that got the attention of Shondaland. And I developed a pilot for them called I Hate LA Dudes. And it was a true story. And they related to the concept as well. And we spent 2 hours talking about the pitch, and then they said, let's do it. And so in that process, I learned a lot just in terms of writing for television, because I'd never written a television show before, and they were just ridiculously patient and great, but I was very, very eager to please in that environment, and felt like this was a single shot that I had. And so in terms of navigating notes properly and using the whole, I hear what you're saying, and I'll work on that, and not, just kind of sticking to what I knew. I was just like, I'll make this work. I'll try to make this work. And even if the notes didn't make sense and didn't feel pretty central to my story, I don't think I knew what my story was at the end of the day. And so the network ultimately passed on the project. And of course I was devastated. I was like, I blew my one shot. And then HBO happened to call and say, hey, we heard you're free. Do you have anything to pitch for us? And that was about a month later. And then that became Insecure. And that process took about 2.5 years, just in terms of developing. And I'm trying to segue into your second question, which I forgot.
Okay. It's about, really you're playing multiple roles in terms of, creator, writer, star of the show. How's that working for you, basically?
Well, I think coming from the internet, like, you are kind of launched into those roles by force. I think I just wanted to write a project, and then I was, by wanting it to be out there, I was like, okay, I have to produce it. And then, I know who this character is. I don't have enough money to put auditions. I don't even know where to do that. Let me just be in it. I get it. And then as the series grew, you're dealing with the marketing and the business aspect. So you're forced into these multiple hats, and you're wearing them all at once. And so I think once the television show came about, it was relief. Like when we shot that pilot, I told them it felt like a vacation, just because it was like, oh, you're doing your job. Like, this is your job, and I only have to wear one hat at a time, it felt like. And I think that is because of the model of, writing the episodes in advance and then shooting them and then editing them in later. And of course, because I trust, we hired a showrunner, and I trust our showrunner. I trust that when I'm on screen, when I'm shooting a scene, that I can take the producer hat off for the most part and rely on his notes. And of course, I give input from time to time within a scene, but I trust a lot of the people that I hired, and we vetted them completely. And so a lot of being able to manage these multiple roles is just having that trust in people and the confidence that they can carry those roles through.
Great, thank you. I wanted, Gina, for you to talk about personal voice in storytelling and what that means to you, because you hear that. I actually say that a lot. People say, "What are you looking for?" And I'm saying, I'm really looking for a unique voice, something that is that it sort of comes from a more deeply personal place. And I'm wondering what role that plays in TV. And if you don't have it, how do you get it? Is that
I'll start by talking about it in film, and just because it absolutely is what started my career. Because as I said, I started in TV, wanted to do features, and knew I had to write a screenplay. And I just set out to write something I thought was going to be commercial, which was this really bad romantic comedy. But I was struggling with it, and it's really because I didn't care. I just wanted to get something out there. But there was this other story about this black girl that wanted to be the first girl in the NBA. But on paper, like, who cares? And who's ever going to want to see that? But it just, my mind just kept going to that, as opposed to this blank paper that was staring back at me. And finally, I had a incident where I was asked to fix a film that had been shot already, and it needed some work, and they asked me to watch it and fix it, and I watched it, and it was so offensive. I'm not going to say the name of the movie, because a friend of mine's in it. It was awful and offensive and racist and sexist, but I was trying to break in, and my agents at the time, I have new agents now, but they said, just write it, get your foot in the door, and then you can tell the stories you want to tell. And so I put together all my notes and was ready to go, and my husband happened to watch the DVD, and right before I was about to go to the meeting, he was like, "What are you doing?" And it was horrifying, because he just said everything that was in my head, and had a good cry, and then had to dry my tears and go to this meeting, and gave all my notes, and they said, "These are great, but they're too smart for our audience," and so I walked out, just called my agent, said whatever they want from what I gave them they can have, but I don't want anything to do with it, and went home, and that was like the trigger. I threw away the couple paragraphs I had of the other thing and sat down and wrote Love of Basketball. And so it was really like finding my voice, knowing that, all of us as writers, everybody has a story that only you can tell. And having that lesson so early on was absolutely essential. And I think you have to have a voice in this business, whether it's film or TV, not only because it's so hard, and you have to be passionate about the stories you're telling to get past all the no's that you're going to get. But also, and I think especially in TV, I think there's more voices in the mix. And so being clear of what your voice is and what you're trying to say is imperative, so that when you get notes, as Issa's saying, and people are trying to change it, you know what to fight for. And for me, they say, choose your battles. But I just when it comes to your vision, there's no choosing your battles. You have to win every battle.
Yeah, great. This is such important advice you're getting. Larry, I want you to talk about the role of theme in one building story, mapping out character arcs specific to OJ?
Well, it's really important for us because we do a lot of true life stories. So, in a sense, a lot of the skeletal plot is there. You know, Ron and Nicole were murdered. You know, Ed Wood made Plan 9 from outer space. Jerry Falwell sued Larry Flint. Yeah. But there are 1,000 different ways to tell those stories, you know, and 1,000 different tones you can have. And part of the thing we bring is relating to what she just talked about was a personal voice. I mean, we have to trust that what we find interesting and what we find entertaining will transfer to other people. But because the skeletal plot is there, what we have to bring to it, it's not enough just to do the events. It's not enough just to retype what happened. So we always think it's important to add a theme on top of it. What is it all about? Why are you telling the story? And for us, a lot of it is beyond them is point of view. What's your point of view on these people and these characters? And for us with OJ, I mean, there's 1,000 different ways you can tell that story and 1,000 different people to come into. But when one of the first decisions we made, where we just literally asked a question like, who is most invested in this? And we really came up with 3 people. And you'd think OJ would be one of those people, but it wasn't OJ. It was Johnny, Marcia, and Chris, because they cared. They had this weird emotional investment in what happened. And those are the 3 characters where the personal was also political. And with those 3 people, you could just latch on to all these different themes we wanted to have and just tell the project from the way we wanted to tell it.
Can I add to that? It's funny because when I was working at ABC, they were so hung up on what's the theme of this episode to the degree where you'd sort of write characters stating the theme and when I got to Mad Men. I think it was one of the first episodes we were breaking, and Matt was talking, and I was like, and what's the theme? And he turned to me and he said, "Fuck that." And I only bring that up because, I think Jill, you really said, for me, what's almost more important than this idea of theme, which is, and Joan, a mentor of both of ours, we'll call it the nugget. Like, what's the nugget? What's the idea you're most exploring in the piece? And like in Transparent, it's "Will you love me if?" And you can say that's a theme, but I just find that theme can be super arbitrary. You don't really have one when you can slap it on after and go, it's about men and a cake. Right. So I tend to think more less in terms of theme, but like for me, like the theme of Sharp Objects, which I'm working on now, is that women have that true equality is acknowledging that women have bad qualities as well as good qualities. True equality is giving room for violence and anger and emotions that aren't necessarily thought of as acceptable for women to have. So to me, the theme is we have that too.
Right. Well, that's why I switched the topic to the more the theme is POV.
Right.
Like for us, it's a lot about how we're going to organize all this mountains of material, and we did an episode called Marcia, where we were like, this episode's not going to be simply about Marcia. There's a lot of plot that's going on, but really highlight the struggles that she went, and so it was a place where we could put all those stories and try to figure out how to connect them. And so there was a jury episode where we just told everything from the juror's point of view. So this is a way of just
containers.
Exactly, containers for all the things we wanted to say. Like that's where we'll put that.
Great. I'm going to ask one more question, then open it up to the audience, which is just to talk about quickly. Because you always hear what's the tone of the piece. What does that mean to you? So I wanted to ask Marti and Issa quickly to talk about that, how you establish tone, how it guides your storytelling.
Yeah, it is the trickiest. To me, it's the trickiest bit and the most important. I think again, Girlfriends is a good example because I knew going in that the tone was kind of Richard Curtis. I love those working title movies. Some of them more than others, but I always went back to that scene in Love Actually, which I think is a really, mixed bag of a movie. It's literally a mixed bag, but there's sequences that I love and sequences that I don't love at all. And I could go on about that for a while, but I won't. But I loved that moment in that movie where you're in this kind of confection, this sort of delightful confection, and then she goes into her bed, Emma Thompson goes into her bedroom having discovered that her husband's having an affair, and she has this silent scene where she breaks down, gets herself back together, and goes back out. And there's another scene in Notting Hill where Julia Roberts' character comes to dinner, and she meets his friends, and one of the friends is in a wheelchair. And I kept thinking, why do these movies work as well as they do? And it was because, as elevated as they were, we always talk about it's about 30,000 feet off the ground, not 120. The characters had a realness to them, so that you could take them so many different places. And so we talked a lot about that as a tone.
Great.
Yeah,
Issa?
I mean, I would agree. It's something that I struggled with early on, and that you can see it in several drafts. And I think for me, it just came down to what's true and what the character felt was true, and it manifests itself in multiple ways. Just in her office environment, for example, you'll notice the tone there is slightly a bit more absurdist, but still rooted in an element of truth. And I think in her, because we play on realism, and we play on real life friendships, and we play on Black womanhood in a way that we want to feel authentic and that we want to feel relatable, and the tone just had to feel like it was true and real at the end of the day. And so I remember in early, after the pilot got picked up, and writing that second episode, that was a huge challenge just in the first three, before we found our stride. And there was one version of our scripts that had pops, like the Family Guy 30 Rock pops, where it's like somebody would say something and then you go to this space. And I had to realize over time in discussions, guys, I don't think our show we don't do pops. I don't think that's us. And it was just oh yeah, we don't. We kind of just live in the moment of the show. And so those are conversations that we're always having, and I think just help to keep the show real.
Great.
One thing I would say add to that is that what's interesting about all of us up here is that I think all of our work does things that I think a lot of books tell you not to do, which is we mix tones. And there's a lot of executives, a lot of film studios that get really uptight when you have a drama and then you have a joke in the middle of that, or you have a funny thing and then also something sad in it. And but to me, that's what real life is. And so I think that's one of the reasons we're all up here right now, is that it's a weird thing to balance, but I think it's important that you're able to just sort of mix tones all together.
Great point. Okay, questions. We can take a couple of questions from the audience. Yes, right there.
Dennis Mounier with Democracy Now!, and I just want to thank Issa for sharing the stage with Amy Goodman.
She's amazing.
Amy. Before airing that, but right before we came in here today, Steve Bannon said media is the opposition, and they should shut their mouths. And I'm just curious, you individually, each of you, or have you thought about how you might, as writers, as artists, incorporate the new political reality into your work? Have you been party to conversations about, the prospect of pressure to censor, to self-censor in your work? We have a president who's also an executive producer with Comcast, NBC, Universal, and so there could be, industry pressures
Sorry.
on writers like and producers.
Yeah, I'll ask a couple of people to answer that question because we don't have much time. But who wants to jump in? Yeah.
I mean, I'm in a real spiral this week, and I'm starting to feel like anything I wrote before the election doesn't matter to me anymore. That anything I planned before the election doesn't matter, because I really planned my life believing that we were moving, that forward movement was modernity, was tolerance, was progress. And we thought we're going to have 8 years of an African-American president, 8 years of a woman. After that, there's going to be a queer woman, a queer African-American woman. Like, we thought forward meant tolerant. And so we were moving this way, and I was writing and dreaming and planning and pitching based on the conveyor belt going that way. And when it turned and went that way, I mean, I'm still like up in the air, floating, flying, freaking, trying to figure out what to do.
I just would say, I will not be intimidated. I will not be silenced. And if I have to get arrested, that's what we have to do, you guys. Like, and this is all about fear and making us afraid. And if we allow that to silence us, then we're playing right into their hands. So my answer to that is I get louder. And fuck that guy. That's how I feel about it.
Okay, we're going to go to another question in the audience. Yeah, over here. Yes.
I'm not a writer, but I've been told as I'm engaging into this industry to create your own work. And I just want to know, in your opinion, if you write your own story, but also want to take on help, people who are writers and are experienced, what emphasis do you have to put on having those writers reflect a similar experience? Or I can say it in un-PC terms too, but does that question make sense?
What's the un-PC term?
Like, if I want to write a story about being an Asian American man, do I need to work with writers who have lived that experience, or work with other writers who haven't, but they have experience writing?
Right.
I think it's a combination. It's you've got to get a sense of the right people. I think that obviously you will know what's right for you, and you'll recognize when people come in and talk to you about the story whether they can, they can do it. Certainly, there should be a diverse group, and you should we on the O.J. Simpson show, we had African American, we had an African American woman, we had there was a diverse group of people in that writer's room to sort of make sure that everything wasn't bullshit. So I think you just have to just judge it from yourself. I mean, I would say lean towards diversity, because that obviously will help things out.
Yeah. We can take one more question. Yes, right there.
I'm an amateur. I don't think I need a mic. I'm a loudmouth, but as an amateur, the discipline of writing, does it ever get easier? Is it always hard?
As a procrastinator, yeah, no, it doesn't ever get easier.
Yeah, no, I mean, absolutely. There's always, even though it's now a blank computer screen, but it is that blank page. That blank page always is staring at you, and there's always 1,000 other things to do, and there's always 1,000 reasons not to write. It's just literally, it's work. You just got to go back and do it.
I hate to be the naysayer. I fucking love writing. I love it. But it took a long time to get there. Yeah.
Actually,
Okay, good luck.
I mean, this is probably embarrassing, but before I start every new project, I literally have to go back and read old scripts to remind myself that I know how to do it. Because it is, I mean, I wish, it is so hard. And it takes a lot to get into that chair and do it every day. It's lonely. It's just you and that computer. It makes me question everything. And I mean, my poor husband, I'm a miserable person when I'm writing. But I write to direct, and when I'm on set, then I'm I hope a really cool person. I'm doing what I love, but it's tough.
Do you like it, Jill?
It's gotten easier for me. One of the things I used to do when I was starting out that I recommend to everybody is pick your, 4 clearest hours of the day and protect those days as those hours as your writing hours. For me, it was 6 in the morning till 10 in the morning, and a big thing for me was jumping out of bed and writing. But an even bigger thing was stopping at 10. I would work for 4 straight hours, and have 3, 55-minute chunks with breaks and no internet, and just create a little crucible around my mind and the material where I could just be lost in the world. And then I would walk away at 10 a.m. and have a day and have a life and go places and talk to people and have relationships. And by the time I got to the screen the next morning at 6, it was like a lover who I couldn't wait to see. And I had used all of my unconscious driving, showering, whatever. The ideas are coming, the good ones are big enough, they stay. And so I think be good to yourself about when you're writing. I think because people are on their computer all day, they spend all day hating themselves for not writing. So decide what your hours are, protect your process, make them, you don't have to do that. If you can get off the internet and focus for 4 straight hours, that's plenty per day. 6, 7 pages, you'll have a pilot in a couple weeks. So, it's about being kind to yourself, I think, and creating pleasure around that writing time, and not being hard on yourself all day long.
And in creating just a kind place for yourself, designating a day for procrastination. I felt like I beat the system when I was like, Thursday, that's the day. And then I'm ready to get back to work because I've allowed myself to just bullshit, for whatever, an entire day or a couple of hours or whatever. But I'm a person who's sadistic in that, I will diet and then look forward to that cheat day just because it feels that better. So I feel like that, designating a
Maybe that's what I'm doing with sex. Never know. A couple more years.
Okay, so this is final.
On that note.
This is the final question, which you might have already answered. So if there's anything else as a piece of advice that you want to give to our audience about starting out in the episodic arena today, is either a writer, director, or producer, would love to hear it. This is like the lightning round. Anything that you felt like you didn't get to say already. Gina?
I think it depends on the person. I'm actually very shy, and I suck at pitching. And so what I've found is that if I write a script, then that's my pitch, and it's much easier to hand over a script. So, and I found that now in TV, you're able to do the same thing. So I would say if you're so clear in what your project is and the story you want to tell, I would say go ahead and write it as a spec. Obviously you're not getting paid for it, but believe in yourself, write that spec. And I don't know, I feel like in many ways it might be easier to sell it because now a network or the cable outlet can see exactly the story you want to tell, see exactly what it is, as opposed to pitching and them suddenly being able to start making comments on your pitch and maybe starting to change your pitch. I just think write your script, write your spec, believe in yourself.
Right, Jill.
I think like what Issa did is pretty amazing and pretty mind-blowing, and that's what I always say to writers is just write, keep writing. A lot of people are kind of waiting around to show it to somebody, to get it seen, to get it read, to get into just like write a script, make it as good as you can, enter into contests everywhere, show it to people. I think when I was starting out, I used to send my stuff to people kind of hoping that I wouldn't hear back so I could just stop. It's like there's this weird self-hatred, and I kept almost kind of running into these I remember I wrote a script and I printed up like 30 copies and I put them in manila envelopes and I sent one to Ben Stiller. I didn't know him. And never heard from him, and assumed it was bad, It's like, I think especially women and people of color and queer people who are used to feeling otherized by the sort of standard white male patriarchal gaze, it's like you're always going to think you're not good enough, but just keep doing your thing. And you don't get a job from pushing your script on people or sending it blind to Ben Stiller. You get one from having a great review of a play in the New York Times, or getting your short into Sundance, or making a film and getting a bunch of views. Like, it's like you have to keep doing the thing and tolerate the feeling of sharing it with people, showing it to people, being willing to get feedback, and just continuing to shape your voice and make things all the time for years and years.
The advice that I always wind up giving is really a paraphrase of Gina's Love and Basketball story, which is write something you want to see. Don't write something you think they want.
Yeah.
Write something you want to see. And I think I learned that when Ed Wood came out. I remember opening the paper on Friday and seeing the ad for Ed Wood and saying, if I hadn't wrote that, I would be so excited to see this movie. I'd be the first guy in line to see that. And I think Scott and I have done our career like that ever since. Is that write the thing that was just like, holy shit, no one else is doing it. I think this needs to be told. And hopefully you trust yourself that if you believe in it, someone else is going to believe in it. If you are entertained by this thing, someone else will be. So it's a different variation on the write from your heart. It's more like write what you want to see.
I've said enough.
It's a pass. Okay, Issa.
I spent a lot of time asking, like, why me? Why am I so special? And I think there's something about what Larry said, just about like, yeah, there are like 100 people could have taken the OJ story and had their own perspective, and I think that's what's valuable, is your unique perspective. Like, how you view the world and how you think is so unique and so special, and no one thinks or views the world in the way that you do, and to recognize that as being valuable. Like, you're you, and nothing is as valuable as a writer as your point of view, and making sure that you stay true to that.
Okay, we did it. Thank you so much.